We are pleased to introduce tonight's readers. Joe McKenzie is a writer who retired after a long career as a public librarian to write poetry, children's stories, and freelance reporting for the Salina Journal, where he writes a column called Cup of Joe. In 2019, Spartan Press, Kansas City, published At the Mercy of Ourselves, Joe's first book of poems. His connection with the Spring Poetry Series goes back to his work as the director of the Salina Public Library, a longtime co-sponsor of the series. In 2006, he was a New Voice Award winner and read in the series that year. His active community involvement informs everything he writes and includes AMBUCS, First United Methodist Church, the Spirituality Resource Center, MOPS, the Stiefel Theater, the Salina Art Center, and Meals on Wheels. Joe is married to Mary Lou, and they have 2 sons, Scott and Kevin, and 2 granddaughters. Lori Brack is the author of A Case for the Dead Letter Detective, a book of poems published in February this year. She is also the author of Museum Made of Breath from Spartan Press, Kansas City, and A Fine Place to See the Sky, a poetic script for a work of performance art by Ernesto Pujol that was presented by the Salina Art Center one spring night from dusk to dawn in 2010. She is an award-winning college instructor, and her writing has been nominated twice for the Pushcart Prize. Lori worked for the Salina Art Center for many years, as well as for class at the Salina Public Library. She was the director of the artist project Spark for 3 years. Recently, she moved to Lucas, where she lives 2 blocks from the Garden of Eden and 14 miles straight south of the geodetic center of the continent.
Good evening. Welcome to the first week of the 2021 Spring Poetry Series. Thank you for taking the time to be part of this great tradition on Tuesdays in April. I'm so honored to be a reader in this series again, but also a little intimidated with this new format to be the first one to do this, and also intimidated knowing that the poets that are coming up later tonight and in succeeding weeks are truly awesome. I want to thank Brad and Anna at Salina Arts and Humanities. I want to thank Lori Brack for organizing this year's series and doing it on such short notice. I also want to thank Patricia Traxler, Ruth Moritz, and Harley Elliott for bringing life to poetry and poetry to life in Salina for so many years. Tonight my time is limited and you're here to hear poetry, so let's get started. I'm going to read 5 poems tonight, and the first poem and the last poem are going to come from my 2019 poetry collection, At the Mercy of Ourselves. And I think this one, for better or worse, kind of fits in with the pandemic year that we've just been through. The 3 poems in the middle are new poems, and again, they sort of flow out of what I've experienced and felt and seen over the past year of the pandemic and the crazy election cycle and our struggles for social justice. So I'll start with the title poem, At the Mercy of Ourselves. At the mercy of ourselves. When it becomes unclear whether God is still on the job, using night vision goggles to police a planet that is out of control, on constant alert, in full riot gear, at war with ourselves while on fire with prayer, selling guns at flea markets, waiting for rapture or a sign we're not alone, but clearly at the mercy of ourselves on a planet that is hot, tired, and angry, looking for new answers on billboards, street signs, and in movies showing pretty people doing stuff that we admire, knowing we shouldn't, and knowing it's not real, and we can't be them in this lifetime with what we were given, but not sure what happened to make us this way. So we grab at anything, cling to heroes just to be allowed to stay, to be on the team, to play the game, or watch and tweet as others play, as we wear their colors and scream, cheer, jump, cry, and die with them, just to be accepted as we are, our face, our color, gender, language, our people, our place in a world where God is on coffee break at Starbucks, chatting up dead angels, even as our time gets away from him, as though he or we are saying, hey, we've got this, no problem, unless we misplace our purpose, misunderstand the plan, or can't seem to even recall what countries are south of the border, or the new taste of hunger, and who can count the diseases, the drugs, costs, or the real cause of anything. We are so distracted by breaking news, disturbed by the final score of a game, immune to horror, desensitized to reality, blinded by our need to dress a certain way, to be someone or someone else, to pretend again and again to be at peace, to be at one, full of faith and grace, and yet often disappointed with others or ourselves when we can't pull it off and no longer know what to believe. When we lose hope in our dreams, not sure what is right, not sure what is real, just a vague awareness of life circling around us, no longer confident of creation and that plan for what we are supposed to do, or where we might find out as churches go out of business and schools put out a lesser product of people who don't have the answers or the real reasons for war, for conflicts with everything different that we don't try to understand, including ourselves. Our inertia and narrow vision of such a small piece of the planet. So when it finally rains on the corn crop, it spoils a summer picnic, or a trip to the lake where we could miss the sound of laughter, or a bouncing beach ball of joy that might fly our way, and we'd instinctively smack it to someone else who passes it on to a child who laughs, runs, and plays, not caring or aware that this is it, the good life, such a simple day at the beach, with family and friends and whatever we make come next. So it comes on us slowly over years, if at all, that this is it. Billions of small lives in days of chance linked by large and small, by beach balls and wars, families and strangers making it happen, sharing the planet, creating a life and offering the hope that we have each other. And together, we are at the mercy of ourselves. Thank you. All right, as I said, that I think that poem, you may not have been surprised if I wrote that in 2020 or 2021 as we were going through the pandemic. And so that's not necessarily a good thing, is that when I wrote that about 3 years ago, things were just as chaotic then as they seem to be now, except we just didn't have the pandemic. So the next poem is a new one. And it's about family vacation. It's called Out of the Woods, and there are a couple of notations I want to make. There's a reference to John Hyatt. John Hyatt, if you haven't heard of him, he's a singer-songwriter, American singer-songwriter that we like. There's also a reference to miles of green dots. And if you look on your Rand McNally atlases, and Kansas has these too, there are roads that have these little green dots beside them, and they're considered scenic routes. The poem begins with an epigraph from Anne Frank. I firmly believe that nature brings solace in all troubles. It was a tense end-of-earth journey, a rental car, smelly sock kids in back, and the two lane through the forest darkened in the afternoon of our family. Vacation is not real life. It's not that place sometimes referred to as normal. We started with an urgency to get far away from normal, to break out of the house and breathe. And here we were, lost on a back road, miles of green dots on a map through woods, listening to John Hyatt sing about lifting every stone, about clearing this field and building that wall, speeding west through unbreathable darkness of endless tall trees, with a logging truck chasing us mile after mile without sky until a sign said soon we would stop. And suddenly there was light, a flick of a switch to a new day, and a brightness splashing over the Pacific, as if it had been there all along, a blue sky announcing all our stones had been lifted as the rocky beach of life unfolded the myth that if we just had faith on this next road, it might lead us out of this time of darkness to a place that might almost feel like home. Well, not all things are dark, and over the past year, I think one of the bright spots, one of the feel-good moments, and we saw this on the news, was when people did wonderful things for each other, often strangers. And we saw that sometimes when people came out on the streets to celebrate and to thank medical staff that were changing shifts at hospitals. They came out on their balconies and they came out on their rooftops and they made some noise and they sang. Last spring, I was on a phone call with my son and a daughter-in-law, and they live in France. And they were on the true lockdown there. They could only get out of the house about once a day for about an hour to get some fresh air, get some exercise, to go to the market, to go to the pharmacy. And they had to have permission. They had to have a permission slip in case the police stopped them and wondered where they were going and what they were doing. So one of the nights I was talking to Scott and Delphine, we suddenly heard a lot of noise. And I said, "What's that?" And they said, "Oh, it's 7 o'clock." And Delphine rushed out to one of the window terraces, and she began banging some kitchen pots and some pans. And you could hear that echoing up and down their cobblestone street there in France. And I could hear it where I was in Kansas, and there was a connection. There was a spirit connection there. And that felt real good to see people out there kind of supporting each other. And it led to this poem called Traces. When they gathered at windows, on rooftops and terraces to bang kitchen pots, to sing, be seen, say thanks, they awoke a spirit with the simple noise of living, releasing a trace of themselves every evening to echo a pulse, to be the face of humanity that said, "We are here. Hear our voices. See us standing, fighting a fear that we are alone in this and could die alone in our bubble, or with nurses whose eyes are the grace of love for a patient who needs to know that they matter, that they count, and through our shared pain and joy, they will always be remembered." Okay, there's no audience in front of me as I read this, really, and sometimes it's good to look out at an audience and to see heads nodding, and sometimes people kind of break into applause at the end of a poem if they think they like it. We sometimes remind audiences that there's no rule that they applaud at a poem. Other people do the finger snapping thing like that, and that's kind of cool as well. So hopefully you're home, you're relaxed, and you're having a drink and enjoying poetry, celebrating poetry, and if you feel something, snap away. That's kind of cool too. All right. The next poem that I'm going to read is the last of the new poems, and this poem is a departure in style for me. The voice may be about the same, but the style is completely different. The first poem, At the Mercy of Ourselves, was kind of a rant. You might agree. The next two poems were probably more of a free verse style that I'm used to reading through. And this one just felt a little bit different. Kind of came out this way, and I'll read it that way. And it kind of came out of looking around and seeing things over the past year, people pointing fingers at what other people were doing, and often they were blaming other people, of course. It's them. It's always they, it's always them, and them were pointing fingers back the other direction and saying, no, it's you, it's them. And I came to the conclusion and ended up pointing at the television screen, watching the news and saying, that's us. This is us. And that's the title of this poem, This Is Us. If ever there was a time to learn, this is it. If ever there was a place to listen, we are there. If ever there were people to listen and learn, this is us. It is time to live with their eyes, to see into other hearts and listen for understanding of who we have become. Men, women, and children hungrily reaching for a chance, sleeping on streets, that's us. Others shot in their homes, us. All God's children, us. A mother marching for what matters while searching for our heart in the crowd, hoping we can see with her eyes and able to love her children. To know we need those kids to thrive, for us to be that nation undivided as we stretch and strive to fit into each other's skin, black, brown, white, red, and proud of our rainbows, beyond the boundaries of blinking stars and faded stripes, ready for that next purple mountain from where we can see God's grace and celebrate the glory in each of us, even as some of us struggle to breathe, as others fight for justice, wearing masks that cover our faces but do not stop, strong voices that express a vision of a nation that is not always first, that is not always fair, and may be violent, crazy, and dumb. And that's us. It's time to accept the challenge to know each other, to be at the everlasting mercy of ourselves, to build a better us, an imperfect union, always becoming more, not the same, not alike, but seeing, listening, and understanding that this is us. One more poem, and then I'll introduce Lori. And I want to thank you once again for being here or being there. Come back every week, have a drink, take notes, celebrate the arts. April is National Poetry Month, a good month for you to read poems between Tuesdays and enjoy that. This last poem comes from the book At the Mercy of Ourselves Again. It's a poem that I haven't read during readings very often at all, for whatever reason. And it relates to the pandemic because so many people were lost around the world over the last year, and that changes the family dynamic. People lost spouses, people lost partners, friends and family members, and so when it comes around time for birthday parties and other family rituals and holidays, someone's not there to share that, and it changes everything. This is a poem called Too Early to Cry. Too early to cry, she thought, as she put on water for a quiet black breakfast tea that would float in a mug like a resort guest, staring up at the cracks in her sky-painted kitchen ceiling, waiting to swim across her stubbly tongue, to be swallowed sip by sip. But she let her tea just sit until cooled to a season-shifting temp, getting ready. Still too early, she told herself, waiting for the change, for a new day to crack that sky and the next season to begin, until she set aside her teacup, brewed a bully pot of proud little Jamaican coffee beans, thinking what she had been thinking all along, as her second thick ceramic white mug of black took hold of her warm memories of him and lifted them, dancing in wispy steam, to that same cracked sky before a new pink sun streaked like a shy child god through her night sink window, before she was quite ready to listen for the birds, to hear the first notes of a hungry song from the first robin of spring, who somehow knew to sing that same song every year, the same joy she heard when he was still alive, and shared this first morning ritual with her, listening together for this simple sign that signaled such new life that it moved them both to smile and was their sign that it was now time and was okay to cry at the wonder of it all. Thank you. Hope you have a lot of wonder in your spring. Thank you for being here and listening. Our next reader is a talented writer, poet, editor, administrator, and a teacher. I've been a student of Lori Brack's off and on for many years, and she's taught me so much. Of course, if you didn't like anything that I read, you're going to have to blame Lori. Okay? No, you won't do that, and I'm glad you're still here. But when Lori is teaching, I've seen her build people up and nurture not just the creative side of writers and artists, but also the human side that helps us make those connections between the real world, between ourselves, our life, each other, and our art. And isn't that what we all need? We need someone to kind of build us up. I hope you're ready. Here's Lori Brack.
Thank you, Joe, for the conscience and empathy of your poems and your care for language and humanity. Something I've never told Joe is that decades ago, Sister Emanuela said to me over the phone that Joe is the best and most natural poet she knew. And that was so long ago, I had not had the chance yet to hear Joe's poems, and so now I know what she meant. Thank you, Anna Pauscher-Morowitz and Brad Anderson at Salina Arts and Humanities, whose support of writers and writing has sustained the poetry series in Salina for its 37 years, and whose support has sustained me as an arts worker here. If you've heard me read in the past, you know some of my artistic obsessions and the kinds of questions that propel my writing. Tonight, I'm reading about half the poems from my new book, A Case for the Dead Letter Detective, that came out this year in February. And I'll start with a few poems from Museum Made of Breath that came out 3 years ago. So I'll begin at the beginning, as Joe showed us how to do, with the first two sections of a poem that is addressed to my sister and brother, in which I'm rowing out in a little boat seeking answers about inheritance. The poem is called A Natural History of Leaves and Rivers. Two landscapes make a pair of hanging veils. We do not need the path of light across the water. We are not merely feral. We do not turn our backs, do not follow its arrow. Boats of our bloodline, born for paddling, whose 100 suits of clothes do we wear? We cast off, pull in the chain. In our pockets, only a pair of coins and a rare stamp from a country we forgot. I walked the river's current, ancient word for stone, for hand, for some of the ways the river under the visible river guides me. Together, we plan an experiment. Our apparatus, mirror and laughter, red fruit in a milky bowl, envelopes, and not quite enough money. We explore the second story on stocking feet where morning rooms glow, toast and jam, wet shirt drying over the chair back. I wash my hands with soap we bought somewhere exotic, each white lozenge wrapped in its pink paper nest. The lines begin to settle, to whisper. A poem is not unlike math in which you solve for x, but almost every noun and verb seem an x to her. You row while I do this. Keep your back to the task while I continue with our sea chronicle. I'm up to the part where I list the invisible fish. In that poem, there are stamps and envelopes, which means there must also be letters, maybe like these two. Dearest little L, I wish I could send you this wonder of peonies, not a photograph or petal, not a full bloom pressed between pages of half the dictionary. I mean the almost bitter sweet scent. One bloom browning next to a white flower's perfection, hiding a rumor of pink at its center, loose sulfur stamens against magenta silk fragments fallen to the table. When I look away to write this, When I turn back, I am lost to you, sure as an ant, coursing such voluptuous chambers. Letter to Virginia. Fill the jug with water and cut an armload of lilacs deep with violet in every petal, each lobe entire with purple. Go back into the garden wearing your brimmed hat, and when you spy the rabbit, so near because you are so still, wheel your hat over it and watch the black circle hop away. Consider the beam of the lighthouse. Let it draw you onto the road home, dropping stones from your pockets as you go. Be your body sufficient again. Since before I could read, I've been fascinated with mail and with words and with reading, of course, and about 12 years ago, a character showed up in my writing at the time that I was living and studying writing next to Puget Sound in Washington State. This character ends up working for a special section of the post office. He works where all the mail that can't be delivered is sorted out. He works in an office where people try to discover the sender of mail that is misaddressed or lost, and their job is to get the letters and packages where they're supposed to go. When they can't, they store it for some length of time, and if it's of value, it's later auctioned off, sometimes months or years after it first ends up in this office of the post office. Here's a sort of found poem from an auction list advertised by the post office in 1875. 8,600 different articles sent through the mails but unredeemed, including jewelry, books, engravings, charms, corn crushers and corn huskers, glasses, needlework, asthmatic fumigators, toothpicks, baby clothes, rosaries, poker chips, crucifixes, and the wing of a bat. This is the poem that introduces the character I discovered when I was sitting inside my room looking out onto Puget Sound. It's the first poem in the new book, and it's called The Dead Letter Detective Listens for a Sign. He knows the best things are hidden, each cupboard concealing what it does. Cool sheets, a favorite cup, rustle of tissue paper and scent he mistakes for the fragrance of peonies. He has opened such envelopes again and again, studied the stamps, noted national beasts and currencies. Before he undoes each flap, his stethoscope investigates the inner clockwork. Plugged to his ears, cold bell of the instrument, hiss of his room, sudden breath and the roar of sighing. If he could choose which one to open, it would be the lion every time, the great furred head, its maw full of singing teeth. Though this book is not a narrative, it's not a linear story, it's not a history, we do find out rather a lot about the detective's work, like in this poem, Overtime for the Dead Letter Detective. Once, almost 3 decades of mail, Luxor riches, emerged from underpass silt, damp corners, tea-brown stains, back of the closet odor. It took a magnifying glass and cups of black coffee to interpret fading addresses on birthday cards mailed to children long grown, to untangle handwriting of pen pals they remember only when the sky unfolds its flimsy blue aerogram. He works through all the seasons of the year, of course, as workers do, and he notices the way his work changes because of what time of year it is. What it means to want. The Dead Letter Detective spends most of each year being good. He keeps rules straight, cuffs unsoiled, order he learned from his mother with her tidy hands and smoky perfume. Winter's voluptuous divide, outside colorless and inside glowing, seems more of her method. Each December, he handles what the season unloads, letters that make him an expert of other people's catalogs of desires. His own longings aren't as simple as a new tie, a moment in someone's presence, the money one simply has coming. In his gray buttonhole, he wears a most profligate bloom. And a different season now, the dead letter detective in spring. I am the official, and my business is finding out. No one comes to fetch me from my room with black and gilded letters on the glass. I am only the man who opens other people's mail behind a door marked official business. Does it matter that this letter between my fingers is fragile as iris, watercolors dripping from wavering petals, that I inhale its deep purple scent? I tend this paper garden like I would a woman. When I was growing up in Great Bend in the 1960s, before I was 10, my parents told me about a famous actress who came from our town. Her parents still lived there or in the vicinity, and I think my dad, to whose memory this book is dedicated, knew the actress's father because of the work that both of them did. One really cold autumn Saturday, I was going in and out of dress shops on Main Street with my mother. This actress had been spotted on the street that day, and all the women in the stores were aflutter. It seems, too, that the detective had an encounter with her. The dead letter detective meets his match. She didn't mean to unhinge him. It was almost Christmas after all. But where were the parcels she mailed from California? One crate of oranges, an array of silk scarves, the gold compact engraved for her mother. Home from Hollywood, where everything is costume, she was barefoot and kept her sunglasses on. He studied his silhouette in each lens, spellbound by the mystery of her undetectable eyes. The fluorescent strip popped overhead, and he found he could not locate his hands. She reached for the pen he forgot how to use. He let her finish her parents' address on the form, each letter black and spiked. He wanted a cigarette he had not wanted in years. He wanted music. He wanted the post office to fly so he could explain this intimation of wings. By now, you're beginning to believe, maybe, that you and I are not implicated in the world of dead letters, but we may find out differently. This is the first dead letter poem I wrote. The detective himself barely makes an appearance, but I think this poem is addressed to all of us. It's certainly addressed to me, and in the ways that were common, maybe this is for all of us. Another case for the dead letter detective. You have a hole in the side of your life. Everyone who looks in sees something else. You try electrical tape over the slot, but it peels away. Someone drops his ring into the hole, and someone loses her eyeglasses. You begin to jangle when you dance. One day, the hole sounds better than you ever could. You tell it to pipe down. The hole in the side of your life spits out things you didn't know were there. A lopsided merry-go-round, a lilac bush where a boy waits, a key to a mailbox you forgot you had, piling up with letters. You climb into the blossoms with the boy. He touches your elbow inside the white sweater you're wearing because it hides the hole. He talks you into taking a spin on the merry-go-round, and when you are whirling, he smiles and swallows the key. A natural history of mail. Lichen-bound, the letterbox of the long-tailed tit hangs feather-lined and spider-silken. When a dormouse collects the mail, it visits an August blackberry thicket, drifting with purple ink where it must elude young women's pluck and grasp. A firefly mailbox looks overturned to the unpracticed eye, a jelly jar of twinkling code. Closer inspection brings to light a whole post office, flashing late, summer, grass. Crows aren't on the postal route. If once they could read, they've forgotten how. When too far for rasp and cackle, they prefer long-distance wings and tails, feather black messages zipping through the sky over the roof he sits under right now. So the detective learns that even animals have mailboxes, and then he discovers that the mail might also be an animal, might be alive. Deep afternoon of the detective. A single set of heel taps, twinned swish of soles, halves of the sharp rhythm of stepping forward. The detective's shadow falls across the floor, separates, then becomes something bright and capable of flight. He watches it go, burnished pocket watch, strawberry sweets, scalloped canopy of a carousel. Goodbye, he thinks, Godspeed. A butterfly in a frame suddenly spotlit by a shaft of afternoon sun blinks, holds gold, releases it. After as hard as the detective works, he deserves a rest like all workers do, and sometimes he takes a vacation. Here he is, somewhere else. It's called Detective's Holiday. Cottonwoods show their palms to him in a flicker of breeze along the Clark Fork, gulping blue, Crazy Mountains, Beartooth Mountains, Sapphire Mountains, river so blue his teeth hurt from glancing, metallic blue, Bessie blue. He writes a postcard in a hand he practiced back at his desk, addresses it to someone in Frenchtown where dinnertime light burnishes the silver steeple. He looks up into the frondy mountain flanks, straining to see the past wearing windy calico, reeking doeskin. He could swear a chronicle of footfall, extinction of paw. Time and distance, those old too. Sometimes, when he's not on vacation, he lets himself disappear into memories of his parents. He also has started to live, or has always lived, outside a single collection. And this is a poem about the detective that isn't included in the book. It's called The Detective Remembers Her Face. She wrote upon it with the magic of her dressing table, jars and bottles that glittered and clinked. Under glass, a postcard of Rome and a photograph made when she was almost a child, her hair spun high. Green, he recalls, were her eyes, a cat's sharp glance, the coral of her lips, exactly as the poet described. Half-light, thrown by a frilly lamp, dimmed the corners where she was not. One powdered oval tripled in the hinged mirror, and the scent of her neck gone vague, the way a camera's flash leaves one blue spot, receding smaller and dimmer against the velvet dark behind his eyes. Memory of the Green Office. The desks are green, the floors, the rank of files against one wall and light seeping through blinds, underwater green, pond green, where turtles emerge with algae dripping and spring frogs sing like a machine. Even the machines are green. The hulking typewriter, a primitive calculator on its own green cart. He is a swimmer as he navigates the aroma of carbon paper and siftings of cigarette ash, kicks his feet to draw closer to the rolling chair covered in green, where he remembers his father grinning at him from behind columns of numbers that wave now like water plants, where everything except him knows how to breathe. By now, you probably have an imagination of the detective, or I hope you do, and where he works. Here's a photo of a late 19th, early 20th century dead letter office from a collection at the Library of Congress. It was photographed by Francis Benjamin Johnston, and it might help you flesh out your vision of the dead letter detective and his work a bit. And while you're looking at that, I'm going to read the poem, A Scholar of Disorder. Chilly dusk murmurs a 4 o'clock word, late and still this much to do. Another letter fitted to the paper, its ragged margins. The detective commands a magician's reputation in the halls of the dead letter branch. When some junior member is stumped, the detective is summoned to divine the address. Fingerprint smudges and ghosts of lines, brown ink spilled in one corner, a blotch the shape of a bird's heart. He squints to read the name, faded as the life. He bends nearer to the page, his heart whispering in his wrists. And finally, in this little book, the dead letter detective finds a clue. Leaves outside the window each could turn a lock, even bird feathers, fence pickets, every bloom fragrant with marshmallow and a girl's first perfume, watery lavender in a transparent bottle. The detective imagines feeling the click and turn, his fingertips plumb full of nerve. The family dog digs a hole in garden soil, itself another key, awaiting a dropped key to sprout a key. All the keys, especially the fat bumblebee, must be tried on tumblers that promise to swing wide the world. And I'd like to finish today with new work from the book that I'm working on that is a combination of essays and lyric essays, which are short, poetic, maybe long prose poem-y kind of things. This one is called The Ground Remembering. Between birth and the Siamese kitten I begged for when I was 5, there were ants, an unending caravan of them plying the beveled crack in the concrete patio where I knelt, sun baking my dark hair soft. At intervals, an ant would cling to the bevel, hang over the row of insects, and use a front leg to brush the others along. This way, no stalling, don't turn back. Transfixed for what I felt were hours, I watched ants behave as I had observed, lined up children outside the school, guarded and chivied by their teachers, from playground to school door. No, nothing about school children. Try again. I want to be the only person watching the heron at the pond's edge. I want to be alone when I discover the wild rose or hear spring frogs tune up. I want to recreate the moment I was born, crouched on concrete, watching a trail of ants. When I looked into that patio crack, the universe looked back, and the matter of my brain took the shape of a mind. Ants kept arriving from my right to my left. My first animals were not pets, but a lineage of insects. When I was closer to the ground, which assumes I am eyes in a head bobbing up here 5 feet from my feet, I lived in a ground world. Bugs seemed bigger. All the outdoor stunners were close. When I knelt on the patio, my knees picked up the pattern of concrete and shards of sand blown in from the sandpit across the street. My knees remember how I rolled my legs to feel the sharp bite of each grain. When I stood, I brushed sand out of my skin, picked stubborn particles free with my fingernail. I had a body and wanted to know what it could feel. I'm recalling a measly kind of self-harm that remains a secret of sensation, hardly pain as much as curious sharpness, malleable flesh around little bits of translucent rock that the wind blew in. Gone astray, once more. Was I like the ant in the crack, or the ant hanging from the side, or the rare ant going the other way? Or not an ant at all, but an anteater, my close-up eyeballs snuffling a long snout, sucking up each black syllable, each pierce of punctuation? Ants looked like letters when I found them in a line, when I learned the purposefulness of ants, the system that requires each to carry out its mission. I fell into scrutiny, entirely alone and without desire to share, down the narrow hole to a new world. This is childhood, its brink, that we are each going to have one single moment our shallow experience has not foretold. And so we are new to the planet as it presents itself inside the narrow spectrum of domestic control. And thus we, one by one, are born. My wide open eye could not get enough. Time slowed, my body evaporated, but for my sun-melting hair. I've been trying to say this ever since. With the book of the ground at my feet, each step discovered pages. First, I'm anyone, the crack, the nothing. Kneeling deep, the I gathers at intervals. I become the syntax of ants, the edge. Does every child imagine her birthday this way, a single afternoon when the world falls away and she is invented by these wayfarers plying the depth of one unfolding revelation? Thank you.